What we do here is go back.
Recording in progress.
Recording is in progress. Yeah, I love how loud that is.
Jesus Christ.
I've never gotten used to it. All right, so like I said, once again, thank you for joining me on this little discussion. So I guess we get right into it. So we only have about 40 minutes before this thing will shut off automatically. So
Okay.
Iacovos, if you'd like to go first, well, both of you could give little introductions to yourselves, what you do, and then we can go more into the actual creation of Banjo and Swift.
Okay.
Right.
You go first.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Iacovos, also known as I care on a bunch of social media at the moment, which stems from 2014. Long story behind that. But as a person, I'm a filmmaker. I'm currently studying film production, about to finish up with that. And book writing was always something that interested me because it obviously is pure storytelling, and it was always something that interested me to write a book. And so I decided to just do that on the side, and that's Banjo and Swift. But yeah, filmmaker by trade, just storyteller in general, with obviously big passion for paleontology, lifelong. That's pretty much me.
I'm Yoya. You can call me Yoya. I'm a Bulgarian paleoartist. I'm 17. I've been drawing dinosaurs for like, I don't know, since I can remember really. I used to draw dragons, and then I slowly kind of naturally transitioned into using more natural, realistic designs, and then I looked up into paleo art, skeletals, all that stuff. And yeah, I mean, me and Akira have been friends for a little while now. And one day he was just like, "Hey, let me tell you about something," and I was like, "Okay." And he asked me to illustrate the book that he had been writing for a little bit, and of course I said yes because that sounded like an awesome opportunity. And yeah, here we are now. That's about it.
All right, cool. So I guess returning to Iacovos first. So the inspiration for Banjo and Swift, like how did that idea actually come about in the first place?
Right. So like I said, obviously I've always wanted to be writing stories and always liked, dinosaur documentaries and all that. I eventually got around to reading Rapture Red when I was younger, and that obviously blew me away. And eventually, early 2019, I find out that due to various reasons, I'm going to have a month of free time in which I'm not going to be doing much. And I decide, right, I've been writing short stories for myself, just as practice with dinosaurs and all that. Should I push this further? Should I try and write an actual short novel? The idea for what actual, the story would be was not straightforward at all. Doing the story that became Banjo and Swift was my third idea for the topic. But really, it was just a case of, right, I'll have this free time on my hands. Let me just write something and see what happens. And yeah, spent a few months coming up with a sort of treatment for that. So I bash out different ideas, do research and all that. And then once I had the treatment, the time came that I was free, and I just started writing it, really. It was just a passion project entirely.
So was it story first and then deciding the format afterwards? Because I know there's you got the story portion, but then you also have the little, I guess, behind the scenes type segments.
So yeah, I don't exactly remember at what point in the process that came along. I said it's been 3 years now, I think, since I really started toying with this idea. But at some point in the process, I was like, I definitely want to be able to talk about the science, because this has to be, educational. I don't just want to be telling this stuff and people to have no idea what's true, because so much of the interest is that these are real animals and that we actually know so much about them. But I didn't want to bog down the story, and it was something I felt is very tricky to do. And again, I turned to nature documentaries for inspiration, and I think When Dinosaurs Roamed America, which was a big inspiration for parts of the style, was the idea for that. So I came up with the idea of doing the science segments, I think, right before I started actually sitting down and writing the book. So when I wrote the book, it was first I wrote the 3 parts of the narrative, and I had the section breaks because it's all structured to, you end the 3-act structure and then to insert a bit of the science. So I guess, yeah, it came after the story itself was decided, but before any actual writing of the first draft of the book came place. And it was a matter of convenience. Like, how do I best get this information across without having it conflict with the story?
Gotcha. So on that note then, because I know when we talk about, aspects of storytelling in science and paleomedia specifically, there's a lot of discussion at least about sort of what are the limits that you impose on yourself when you are working from a more scientific standpoint. Do you ever have a point where you were thinking, oh, this would be cool to have, but it's not supported by XYZ evidence? So, was there any sort of conflict in that, or were you sort of confident enough in what you knew to just write what you wrote?
I think a large part of it was that I got very lucky in that I settled upon the Winton formation, which just has so much story potential in it. It's just got one of everything. And it's got all these elements. And when I was looking into Australventor and you come up with the different biology stuff, it kind of found its place for large parts. So I didn't have to worry about that too much. There were obviously a couple of creative licenses. Mild spoiler, Chronosaurus turns up. But that was, I think, that's creative licensing. And I think that was one of the biggest points. But a lot of time, and also I got very fortunate in that our environmental understanding is not really that solid. Like, we know it was very varied, which is, as a storyteller, that's fantastic. You've just got, it's something varied, and you have the different ranges you can play with, which really helped. And of course, I think the luckiest I got was, I think the biggest creative liberty I took was in the sense that in the first draft of the book, I completely make up this pterosaur that's going to be an antagonist for the story, and it's a foil. And then after writing the first draft, Ferro Draco was described, and I'm like, perfect, I just have to swap out the name and I'm done. So a lot of it got really lucky. Writing about characteristics, going in, like, how much do you personalize dinosaurs is the trickiest part. I decided I was going to try and not concern myself too much with that. I was just going to keep the story simple. I looked at the way modern animals are presented, actually. That was the big departure from prehistoric documentaries. Is I looked at stuff like David Attenborough documentaries to see how they managed to personalize characters and create characters out of these animals through their actions and through their dynamics, rather than inner thoughts, which I tried for the most part to avoid. And obviously I avoided first person largely because Raptor Red. No, does Raptor Red do first person? It's been ages since I've read that book, which probably shouldn't be saying because that took inspiration.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, actually, did it? Because I know I read it recently, about a couple of years ago, because that was the first and only time I read it. It didn't do first person. It was very much like a third person description of her exact thoughts. I think that's how it went.
Right.
So it was very much in her head. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So it was that. I was trying to avoid the whole in your head, get a bit of that omniscient narrator in. And I'd say actually one of the great advantages of writing a book over writing something like a script or a documentary is you don't have to draw that distinction between when there is this omniscient narrator and when there's just description of visuals, because it all just sort of blends together. So it helped with the characterization. So to answer your questions roundabout way, I think in terms of creative liberty, the biggest problem was how do you characterize these characters, because you need empathy at the end of the day to get the story to work. And I think that was tricky, but also was something where I had to like sit down and be like, I can't be too hung up about making them characters, because the inner motivations are what you need to drive the audience's interest, and that's how you'll get the science and education across. I thought that was the sacrifice I was most willing to make.
Right, that makes sense. That definitely makes sense, and it definitely comes across throughout the book, particularly in the third part, I would say. And I think you did an overall pretty good job at balancing a lot of those things. It definitely read like very strongly like a not a script, but a draft for a Dinosaur Planet episode.
Yeah. Yeah.
You think? So actually, you mentioned, getting lucky on settling on the Winton formation. Was the Winton formation the initial idea for the book, or were you scouting around for other locations beforehand? And like, what made you settle on it?
I was scouting around a lot. The last two I settled on was it's Winton, and it's the, I think, James Ross Island locality. I don't know if there's a Snow Hill Island formation, which would have featured the dinosaur now known as Imperabator. And I'm so thankful I decided to go with Australopithecus of Imperabator, because shortly before I started writing the book, obviously Imperabator is described and it's not a dromaeosaur, and there would have gone out the protagonist and all that. So a lot of luck, but yeah, it really was not like Winton or even Australopithecus was my go-to choice. I just scattered around, came up with several different potential story ideas, and looked at again what was being done in sort of nature documentaries and how you craft stories from that. And ultimately it was through process of eliminations, like, right, Winton's the one to go to for this project.
Okay. So then shifting a little bit over to Yo-Yo's path when it comes to illustrations and just deciding, I guess, on character designs, because I mean, obviously this is a novel, so there's not a lot of illustrations, but I mean, I guess this question kind of goes for both of you, because I was wondering, as I was looking at the art that is in the book, how did you decide on, what they would look like? Or is it something that you were talking to yourselves back and forth with, or was it the artist, or I should say the illustrator making their own decisions, and then you added your little sprinkle to that in the text, or like, how did that actually work out?
Okay, do you wanna say how the process went, or should I go?
You go for it. Go for it.
Okay. I'm really happy that I work with Takara, to be honest. We make a great team. He gave me a lot of it. I had a lot of freedom doing the illustrations. There was a lot of communication between both of us, though. Like, we went back and forth on like almost every detail. I would do a sketch, and I would send progress almost constantly back and forth, and it was great. Like, when we had very few, like, I shouldn't really call them hiccups, but like more of, I had imagined it in a different way than he did, and stuff like that. But like, we had very few of those, and we worked through them very quickly. And like, I don't know, I just kind of did my own thing. It kind of came naturally for the designs. The character had some ideas, but a lot of them came like pretty naturally to me. He burdened himself with the responsibility to give me all of the references, basically, because he had been writing the story, so some details are more important for the design. So he gave me all the references that I should use, and I just kind of drew all of them. It kind of came naturally. That's kind of how it went.
Yeah, I'd very much second Yo-Yo on that. It was very much a sort of natural evolution, back and forth, and great collaboration throughout the process is sort of what led to that.
Okay. Yeah, so how did you decide, moving further, I guess sort of the style of the art itself? Because we said, in the beginning of the book, we have little like very interesting like field sketch sort of style to it. There's no real colors or discernible patterns. I think the cover art is the only thing that actually has coloration for it. So I guess, how much of that was an intentional detail, or was it, excuse me, intentional omission? Because I'm thinking, in literature, a lot of the descriptive process, I think is the storytelling process, is to let the audience imagine some of this in their head, right? So you don't want to dictate every little detail to them.
No.
So that, I guess, was that the sort of direction you wanted to go with having these just black and white images?
I mean, yeah, part of it was to sort of emulate the older style. Like I said, Rapture Ed, I think was the biggest inspiration on that part, having the sort of black and white traditional, paleontological illustrations rather than the more colorful ones you find in sort of the past couple of decades. If you go to like your Bob Backer, or even, well, I was gonna say Bob Backer or your Rapture Ed, but he's of course responsible for both. Basically, the style Bob Backer popularized of doing these sort of black and white sketches, very sort of dynamic, but sort of taking elements of that with a more field guide style design. And the idea of not having them be in color was from the get-go, because like you said, it's nice to let the audience's imagination go with that. I, for one, whenever I'm reading, I will always imagine something, and then most of the time that gets completely at odds with later information supplied. So it's not just in the art, but for instance, I made a conscious effort to never describe any of the colors of any of the dinosaurs in the book, with the exception of Australoventor, wherein the colors like of the tail and the indicators of their sex are actually narrative relevant. I've deliberately avoided describing colors to pass that over to the audience. So that's why that was my train of thought on that part.
Okay, yeah, I figured as much when I was looking through it. Initially, honestly, I was sort of wondering, oh, why didn't they describe any of these things? But I can definitely see why you did what you did. One of the other things I was wondering, this is just a very minor thing, I think. When it comes to, I guess, naming characters, and not just naming, when I say naming characters, I mean both individuals, but also like species as characters, or genera as characters anyway. I don't know how much of it was intentional or not, but sometimes like the scientific names will be italicized. Other times they're not italicized, and I'm not sure. I'm just curious if there was any intentionality behind those decisions. I know Banjo is, as a name, I think was the name given to the holotype of Australoraptor, if I remember correctly, right?
Of Australoventor, yeah. Yeah, that's the holotype. And I think the only times I italicize is for the scientific binomials in the scientific segments, because I had chats with like obviously more scientifically minded people while producing the book, and they very much wanted to see, the tradition that you italicize scientific binomials for the more scientific segments. But I also felt I could not write the entire book and italicize every genus name, because that would, I think, have been too much of a barrier, made it too technical for the general public. So that was the motivation behind that. As for the names of the characters, Banjo and Swift are the only two named ones beyond just generic names. Banjo, obviously, like you said, is the holotype of Australoventor, and with Swift, I really wanted to pick a name that's not based on a physical attribute, because that's, I think, so common in every piece of dinosaur media, when really animal nicknames and pet names and all that just very much often stray from physical attributes. It's not a real representation, I feel, of how they're named. I suppose I could have gone with just an ordinary name even, but I decided to go with, I suppose speed is in a sense a physical attribute, but it's not like coloration or appearance, and it's more as generic signifier of the taxon. So I just wanted to go with that to avoid the sort of routine, this is dinosaur, this is what it looks like, boom, there's a name. And also avoid naming it something that has to do with a generic name. Just really want something to stand out there.
Gotcha. I was wondering, though, if you were aware that you've relegated yourself to being buried behind a wall of just Taylor Swift playing the banjo now whenever you search your book title.
I am aware. I've learned that the hard way, but yeah. I mean, naming the book was another interesting one, but because I was aware it was a tricky one to name. For most of its production, it was just called The Book or the Australoventor Book. And then once it became close to being said, I was like, do we just stick with this working title that had just naturally sort of evolved to be Banjo and Swift? It's just, these are the protagonists and this is their story. And I did want to communicate that this is their story and not just Swift's story, because I do very much feel it's both their story. So I was like, yeah, I just want to stick with both characters' names because this is their story and I want to relate it to that.
Okay. Yeah, it's very amusing because I was looking to see if anybody else had ever actually covered this book or in any sort of capacity. And as soon as I looked for it,
Yeah.
YouTube just has a litany of these. And then Google, if you look at Google Images, at least, I think maybe the first row is like the book cover, and then some stuff I think Joshua Knuk did for his paleo stream. Yeah, and then after that, it's just Taylor Swift on stage.
Yeah.
It's very amusing to me. I say.
Did not know she played the banjo that much. So that's something to bear in mind for next time.
So I guess that we're actually running a little short on this meeting time, but I mean, we've covered most of the ground I wanted to cover. I guess the only real questions towards the end of this is just, well, one, what would you like to have done differently, or what would you do differently if you were to do this again, or I guess do a second edition? And this goes for either of you.
Yeah, I'll let Yo-Yo go first actually, if that's cool.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. What would I have done differently? I mean, natural artist thoughts. I would like to put a little more effort. Not that I didn't put enough effort into the art. I always wanna put more effort if we're gonna do another project together. I wanna do a bit more effort, put a bit more effort into the individual designs themselves. I don't know if I would change anything about the cover, really. I think I'm pretty proud of how the cover turned out. I think it's quite it kind of fits the whole book. I think it's a good representative of just looking at the cover and just like, I think it's a booming kind of design, so it just lures you in a little bit. I don't know if I would do anything different about the cover, but like just kind of put a bit more effort into it. I would also just love to do like this might sound weird, but like I would love to do more art for the book, for like the book. If we're doing another book, if we're doing another project, doesn't matter. But like just more art. I would love to just do more and just maybe a bit more diverse than just the side view individual designs of the animals. Yeah, that's about it for me though.
Yeah, for me, I think there's a lot I do differently. Obviously, it's been 2 years since I wrote the first draft. And it's easier for me, I think, initially to sort of approach the feedback is gone. I think the length of the book, it is quite short, all things considered. It's very much, I think you remarked upon it earlier, it's kind of like a script in that way. It very much falls into the 70-minute mark, I think, almost like 70 pages. But I don't know if I would do that differently. I'd consider more that aspect of it. I'd consider, again, experimenting perhaps more with format and illustration in the next one. Sort of see, push the boundaries more. But again, that's a next one sort of thing. I'm more just looking forward now than looking back at redoing it, because you can get lost forever in questions of, what would I do differently? And I think because it's such a simple story, I'm fairly happy with it as a result of that. There wasn't as much room narratively for me to slip up, I feel. So I think maybe more diverse cast of protagonists, perhaps. I think it's very much just Banjo and Swift story, and I'd like to explore different avenues sort of dinosaur life than the oft repeated, sort of survival, procreation, curtain, the end. But I think for a first endeavor into this genre, in the sort of published nature, I wouldn't really change that much about it.
Okay, and is there, I mean, you mentioned loosely for next time or a next time. So can we expect a next time? What might that be looking like?
I don't know. I can't you speak. I'm not gonna say shit.
I can't confirm the next time yet because it's really a case of finding a good story. I think the only way Banjo and Swift was sustained for so long and as a passion project, which it would be, like I said, this is not a career for me. This is a hobby. So it would have to be an idea I feel really strongly about and that I feel brings something new to the table. If that hits me, I'd say definitely I'll try and do one. As for Orkin, I'd also, like I already teased, I'd like to experiment with format a little. I won't necessarily exactly say what I have in mind, but I might just try something more experimental next time because again, it's about, for me, this being passion is about pushing boundaries. It's about in terms of storytelling. I don't know about you, Yo, if there's, I mean, I know I'm asking you if I've got a next time in mind, but
Oh, I'm ready.
Yeah.
I'm ready. I definitely would love to do another project like this. I would love to.
So are there any current projects that you would like to little low-key sort of push on here? If you have anything, not necessarily Banjo and Swift related or anything dinosaur related even, but just generally.
I mean, it's not dinosaur related. If you find me on Twitter or Instagram, I guess, although I hardly ever post on Instagram because that's my professional account, but stay tuned. There's a lot of film projects coming out my way. I'm pushing that. It's very, very far removed from paleontology and all that, but I think on my end, I'm just churning out, but it's still narrative stuff. So if you're interested in narrative, I will never do, something too non-narrative based because that's me. I'm in stories, I'm entrenched therein. So if you're interested to see what more stories I have a hand in various different ways, follow me on any social media. And I've got a bunch of films in the works. The other nature, of course, is with films, it's not stuff being made for release, it's stuff being made for festival run. So it'll be done. I've got films I finished ages ago that I just cannot release, unfortunately. But
right. And you, Yo-Yo?
Twitter. I post drawings on Twitter and very rarely on other social medias because I forget, but I do have others. Honestly, right now I'm a bit far from paleo stuff. Maybe a little far. Like right now, I'm getting a little back more into drawing. So I've been a little more active on like drawing. Right now, I'm working on a big piece, so like a full A3 background and everything, environmental piece, which is gonna be cool. I'm kind of excited about that. And I can't really say much about expect something. More of I have plans for the future, but they're kind of long plans. Like they're not something that's gonna happen soon. So just I got a Twitter. I post drawings. They're cool. You can follow.
All right, will do. If I'm not already, I think I should. I think I do though. Let me make sure. So that excuse me. So that kind of brings us to the end of that then. So once again, thank you all for joining. Appreciate the little chat.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having. Yeah, it was nice.
Of course. Nice. And whenever you do have something, like always feel free to let me know.
Yeah, definitely.
Sure.
All right, let me end the recording here then without closing the thing. Running out of time. We removed the 40-minute timeline. Oh, really? A gift from Zoom.
Yeah, I don't know why they do that or what reasoning there is behind it.
I feel like it's going to lure you in to just pay for something, but whatever.
Yeah. I was like, every couple of months I'll be like, here. It's like some extra time.
Yeah, love it. Love it indeed.
Recording stopped.